From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Michigan communities are going to receive less tax revenue because marijuana sales declined last year.
One reason? Continued plummeting sales. And things could be even worse next year when the state's new 24% wholesale tax on marijuana comes due.
So let's turn to Crain's Detroit Business's senior reporter Dustin Walsh to get some answers about the latest in politics surrounding marijuana in Michigan, including the introduction of legislation that would repeal that controversial new wholesale tax. Dustin, hey.
Hey, how are you?
So first, let's just talk strictly dollars. Fill us in on where things stand with revenue, because it's not been a rosy picture.
That's right. So 2026 has started off pretty poor. January's numbers were down, and now February's projected numbers, these are coming from an analytics firm, not officially from the state. We'll see those numbers sort of in a week or two. But so far, it looks like about a 14.8% year-over-year drop, and an even farther 9% drop from January to February this year. That puts us on pace to turn sort of like 2.6 billion in yearly sales if these sort of depressed numbers continue through the year, far down from the 3.1 last year and the 3.2 the year before. And so it's really sort of showing that either people are enjoying their New Year's resolutions and not going to the store, the shine has worn off the industry, or this 24% wholesale tax is really sort of taking hold.
And is that the big reason behind this drop? Are there other factors?
So we don't know. I mean, obviously, January, we had really Michigan wintry weather that could have kept people from going to stores. Early indication is sort of that. And people could have stocked up in December, obviously, before the tax went into play. But the interesting part that we're seeing is that prices haven't gone up. People are still trying to get rid of the oversupply that exists in the system. And so prices really haven't moved up even with the wholesale tax. So we don't know if it's consumers sort of protesting this idea of an additional tax or maybe, the wintry roads kept them off and there are the whole people that do New Year's resolutions. Maybe they don't want to get high anymore. And then we have, sort of the stockpiling and everything else. So we don't know really what customers are thinking and why they haven't been going to stores in the last 2 months.
Was this expected?
I think so. If you talk to the industry, they obviously are against the tax and very much said, hey, this is going to kill us. We're already not making money, and you're going to just make it harder for us. And so, everyone kind of expected. I don't think people are expecting the drop we may see in February. A 14.8% year over year is a pretty big one. That would wipe off hundreds of millions of dollars from the total in 2026 if that sort of pace maintained. But yeah, I think, everyone's sort of turning and blaming the legislature, obviously, for the decline in sales. But it's also, sort of mixed with, we've seen this in other states. We've seen other states sort of, as the industry matures, sales go down, the shine of sort of marijuana wears off a little bit. So it's sort of this perfect storm happening all at once, but with a very easy, tax law to point and blame to.
And my understanding is some of this might also be because Ohio recently approved the legalization of marijuana.
Right. So that may have a small impact. We haven't seen, because our neighboring states, particularly Illinois and Ohio, that do have legal recreational weed, we've seen sort of some of that have impact. Over in Monroe Township, which is sort of our big area that gets a lot of the Ohio sales, is down maybe 5-6% is what I'm hearing from retailers there. So not a major impact, but certainly a lot of money. On the west side of the state, Illinois' prices are still very, very high. Indiana not having legal marijuana, places like New Buffalo Township and those others near the border there are still booming. So we haven't seen any impact there. So really, I don't think this can really be attributed to that. We didn't see this sort of drop off when Ohio went legal. Obviously, prices every month there do sort of come down in price, but they're still well above. We have the cheapest marijuana in the country. And so we're such a low-cost state that it still drives people to come here.
What do we know about which communities in Michigan are going to be most affected by this decline in tax revenue?
So the tax revenue, obviously, Detroit has the most amount of sort of retail and micro businesses that get the tax revenue. But Detroit, it's such a small, it's 0.1% of their total budget. It's almost a nothing for Detroit. But places like Monroe Township and New Buffalo Township, these small communities of 2,500 people that have a lot of retail outlets, that makes up substantial. New Buffalo Township, they raise enough in tax revenue to pay for their entire police department. In Monroe Township, it's something like 20% of their entire budget, 25% of their entire
Wow.
budget. So you're talking about, potential layoffs if the revenue continues to decline.
Meantime, there was new legislation just introduced by Republican State Senator Jonathan Lindsay that would repeal the wholesale tax. We should note it has some bipartisan co-sponsors, but does it have any chance moving forward in either legislative chamber?
Before I say what I say, bear in mind that I am not a Lansing political expert, but my answer is no chance at all. The amount of political capital it took to sort of get this through and sort of the dead of night way in which they did it. And we have to remember we have a governor that is, fixing the damn roads is her entire thing. And she believes her legacy will be judged on that. Without some sort of other means to fund the the road repairs, I don't see how this stands a chance. If you look at sort of the people that are behind this repealing the law, it's people that have us, that have a community that relies on cannabis. Places like Coldwater, where Senator Lindsay is from, and other places. And so you're sort of seeing them, at least for the constituents and the people that vote for them, taking a stand. But I just don't see how this makes inroads when we have a governor that I don't believe would even sign it if it went through.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned road repairs. Remind us why this legislation to create this new wholesale tax on marijuana was passed in the first place. After all, no lawmaker is super into increasing taxes, even a so-called vice tax.
Right, and that's sort of the crux there is sin taxes are forever and always the easiest ones to sort of stomach, the easiest ones to get through. And so we had this idea, particularly the Democrats had this idea that they needed to raise revenue for road repairs. They allowed this sort of got a bipartisan support among the Republicans and the Democrats, and they were able to sort of, squeeze this in with this idea that the Democrats sort of came back, were like, okay, well, we're sorry in, marijuana industry that we're going to have to do this to you because we have to raise this revenue. And then maybe we'll come back later and we'll figure out ways to sort of supplement it and give you what you need. So that's why we've seen sort of legislation being introduced that is going to potentially open it up for exporting certain products out of the state of Michigan to other states. Other legislation that's sort of what the industry has always wanted, they're sort of dangling out there. But the problem is we haven't seen that legislation really move through the House and the Senate, other than sort of being introduced and talked about. And so no movement has really happened on that side yet. Yet the industry is sort of having to wrangle with this tax that happened very quickly, and the Treasury didn't really get its the X's and O's of how this is all going to work out very quickly. And so there's still a lot of confusion in the industry. Meanwhile, they're sort of seeing lower foot traffic.
We're speaking with Crain's Detroit Businesses' Dustin Walsh, our guy with his eye on weed in the state. Dustin, there's this ongoing legal challenge, meanwhile, over the new wholesale tax that we've been talking about. Where do things stand right now in the courts?
Right. And so this is relatively confusing. So obviously the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association, which represents the most amount of operators in the state right now, they obviously quickly filed a lawsuit against the tax, saying that the legislature violated a number of things in doing so and passing it. It went to the Court of Claims, and sort of the judge there sort of threw out a couple of the arguments and is really sort of trying to figure out this one tiny argument that may or may not even impact whether the tax exists or not. So no one's really happy in this. The state has sort of appealed to the Court of Appeals to sort of get a summary judgment on the whole thing. And the MICIA, the industry itself, is sort of seeking the same thing. So nothing we know is going to really change with what's going on at the Court of Claims and where that legislation is. But it's really all eyes sort of on the Court of Appeals and whether they take up the case and whether they sort of rule in the favor of one side or the other on what happens with this tax.
So what is the cannabis industry arguing?
So the cannabis industry is arguing that they basically did a bait and switch. that the legislature had put together this road fund committee that needed to be voted on, and then the dead of night, they then did a substitution with the language to make it so the funding mechanism for that road funding committee, or that road fund, sorry, was going to be pushed through with this new 24% wholesale tax. There was no public debate. There was no sort of anything else. They pushed it through and voted on it in the dead of night, and then suddenly it was moving through the legislature. And so that's the sort of the primary argument, is that you guys did a bait and switch. You didn't follow any of the rules. This wasn't designed to do this. You guys knew what you were doing. You did it sort of without any sort of debate on it. And we've sort of seen that play out with the substitution rules in the state. There's been other ones that have happened in that way in the past, and so that's their primary argument. And then the other argument is that the language in the legalization of marijuana that we all as citizens voted on in 2018. Basically, it's sort of ambiguous, and the courts have sort of ruled either way. But the idea is that the excise tax, the 10% excise tax, was the only available tax on the product of marijuana, and that the legislature could not, by the virtue of citizens voting on this, add a tax to it. The AG's office and the state disagree, and so that's sort of where we're at now.
Well, let's double down on that. What is the state's argument? Because it's pretty nuanced.
It is. So, I mean, the state's really trying to say that no, that was only on, the 10% excise tax is only one option we have. That the language actually allows us to add it. And by the way, we're not adding this as a tax on the citizens buying it. We're adding it on the idea of wholesale sales, where basically it leaves a processor and then goes to the retailer. That's where that tax is collected. And so they're saying it's not on the consumer. And so you only focused on what was being able to be charged to the consumer. We're charging it earlier in the process, and therefore it is legally allowed.
Right. I mean, sort of in brief, that the marijuana industry says that this is illegal because it changed what voters decided. And the state is saying this is legal because this is about raising revenue for roads and not about marijuana. The tax just happens to be on marijuana. It doesn't even touch the actual language of the initiative.
That's correct. They're acting as if it acts outside of MRTMA, the marijuana legislation. And so that's sort of where we are. And it's complicated. It's not easy to decipher legally because, it's hard to predict all of these things that are going to occur when laws are written, right? So it is sort of nuanced in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Dustin, I'm curious, I'm thinking about we're in this huge election year, the entire state house up for election, the entire state senate. Do you think this increase in taxes, this wholesale tax on marijuana, could be something that rises to an issue that we see folks campaigning about this year?
I think so, but I think it'll depend on where they're campaigning and where their districts are. Obviously, if you're an area that voted overwhelmingly for this, and you have a lot of pot shops, and the community hasn't turned against you, we're seeing communities where they're trying to push back against having too many. Places like New Buffalo Township, for instance, It has 2,500 citizens, and they have 29 retail outlets at the moment, up to 35 by the end of the year. We're talking, one pot shop for every 70 citizens. So you're seeing community pushback there because, they literally are on every street corner. But other places where they view it as, an asset to the community, I do believe you'll see some people campaign on it. And they'll campaign like, hey, we're trying to do what's right here. This is a meaningful revenue. This is what our citizens want. We think people made a mistake by passing this tax, and it's harming our citizens. It's harming our ability to supply services to our citizens. Now, I don't think that's going to be something that's going to happen in every race,
right?
But certainly, I think in a handful.
Dustin, finally, what are you going to be watching for in your reporting over the next few weeks, months?
So really, it's going to be about the survivability of the industry. I mean, I certainly think the industry writ large is going to survive, but we've already seen people sort of tap out. And the other issue that we're running to is who's trying to perform well and who is going to now start cutting corners. We've seen large swaths of this industry sort of turn to this mixed area of dealing in the black market while also holding licenses and having, legitimate shops or grows or whatever it may be. And I think, adding this tax where you're already probably not profitable is going to make you behave differently. And it's going to change the behavior and probably not for the better in a lot of cases. So it's really going to come down to what kind of enforcement happens, what we're seeing in the industry, and we're going to have a whole year to do it because the Treasury actually isn't collecting any of the tax revenue until January 2027.
Right.
So you're supposed to sort of put it off in escrow or whatever throughout the year. But if you're already not making money and you already are past due on either other taxes or your vendors or whatever it may be, you're not going to be saving that tax revenue. And so it's really like, are people just going to be limping through all the way to the end of the year and then we're going to see a massive closures? That's sort of what I'm looking for is has this fundamentally changed the way that the operators in the industry behave?
Yeah. And Dustin, what are you hearing about maybe it's a good thing for the marijuana industry for there to be kind of a culling?
Yeah, and I think that's true to a certain degree. I mean, so if you look at the way we set up our industry, it was very much a Wild West, and regulators are playing catch up because it was, hey, if you can meet the criteria and you can find a community that's going to let you in, you have a license from the state. And so that propped our industry up very, very quickly, but it also allowed a lot of product to flood the market and prices dropping dramatically and people not making any money. And so you've seen sort of this perforation to where the black market stuff is getting through and people are engaging in the black market. And so I think that's what we're going to see going forward. And those people eventually run out of runway, right? You can't operate a black market business for long, and especially as regulators are sort of ramping up their ability to find the wrongdoing, quote unquote. And so, yeah, I mean, to some degree, a culling probably isn't a bad thing. It's probably going to make safer, higher quality weed in the long run. But it's also about availability, right? If it's not available, people are going to turn to other means to get it. And so it's sort of that balance of, is there going to be enough product available while also reducing sort of the quote unquote bad players in the industry?
That is Dustin Walsh. He is senior reporter at Crain's Detroit Business, covering all things in the state's marijuana industry. Dustin, thanks so much for your insight.
Thanks, Dustin.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Before we go, a reminder, if you haven't already, to sign up for the It's Just Politics newsletter. This week, we're bringing you stories on Governor Whitmer's visit to the White House and Attorney General Dana Nessel saying she will not appeal a ruling dismissing charges against those 2020 so-called fake electors. Those stories and much more in the It's Just Politics newsletter in your inbox every Friday afternoon. It's easy to sign up at the website michiganpublic.org. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.